The wind howled through the mountain pass as Alara climbed the worn stone steps to the ancient sanctuary, her lantern flickering against the encroaching darkness. The village below had already shuttered their windows against the night, but she continued upward, as she had every evening for the past 3 years since her grandmother's death. The sanctuary stood alone on the cliff face, a structure so old that no one in the village could remember who built it or why. Moss covered the crumblings. Walls and ivy had claimed the columns, but Alara maintained her vigil with a devotion that puzzled the villagers and earned her whispers of being touched by madness. They called her the Candle Girl, the strange orphan who spoke to stones, but they left her alone because the sanctuary was considered cursed and no one else would tend to it. Her grandmother had been the keeper before her, and her great-grandmother before that, an unbroken line of women performing a ritual whose meaning had been lost to time. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into the vast chamber that served as the heart of the sanctuary. In the center of the circular room stood the statue, and even after all these years, it still took her breath away. Carved from a single massive piece of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the wolf stood twice the height of a man, its form so lifelike that sometimes Alara could swear she saw its chest rise and fall with breath. The craftsmanship was beyond anything human hands could achieve in the current age. Every strand of fur was individually carved, every muscle perfectly rendered beneath the stone skin. And the eyes, those eyes were inlaid with a silvery metal that caught the faintest light and seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. The wolf's posture was one of alertness, head raised as if scenting the wind, one massive paw lifted as though frozen mid-step. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Alara approached as she always did, with reverence and a strange sense of coming home. She set her lantern aside and withdrew a fresh candle from her satchel, placing it in the brass holder that sat at the statue's base. The holder was old beyond measure, green with patina, but it had clearly been designed for this purpose, with intricate engravings that spiraled around its surface in patterns that hurt to look at too long. As she struck her flint and lit the candle, she began the words her grandmother had taught her, words in a language she didn't fully understand but had memorized phonetically. Guardian of the threshold, keeper of the balance, I light this flame in your honor. May it guide you through the darkness. May it remind you that you are not forgotten. The candle caught, its flame burning unusually bright and steady despite the drafts that whispered through the sanctuary. What Alara didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that inside the stone, prison, Kieran felt the warmth of that flame like a ray of sunlight piercing 1,000 years of absolute darkness. He had been aware for every moment of his imprisonment, his consciousness trapped in an unmoving body, unable to sleep, unable to escape, only able to observe the slow progression of seasons through the sanctuary's high windows, and listen to the eventual silence as his people faded from memory, and the world forgot he had ever existed. The curse had been perfect in its cruelty, designed by the very council he had served, the elders who feared his power more than they trusted his loyalty. They had lured him to the sanctuary under the pretense of a sacred ritual, then bound him with magic drawn from his own bloodline, using his strength against him to create chains he couldn't break. For centuries, no one came. The sanctuary fell into ruin, and Kieran existed in a void of sensory deprivation so complete that he began to lose himself, his memories fragmenting, his identity dissolving into the stone. He forgot his name, forgot what warmth felt like, forgot everything except the rage and the pain. Then, 3 years ago, he had felt it, a presence, a warmth, a voice speaking words of the old tongue, words of remembrance and honor. The first candle had been like a distant star in an endless night, barely perceptible, but it was something, and he had clung to it with desperate hunger. Night after night, the candle returned, and with it, the voice. Agonizingly slowly, Kieran began to piece himself back together. The warmth of the flames rekindled something in him, a connection to the living world, and he realized that the magic of the candles was ancient binding magic, the kind used to tether spirits, or in this case, to maintain a connection between the physical and spiritual realms. The girl who lit them had no idea she was feeding him power, tiny amounts each night. But after 3 years of nightly offerings, it was enough for him to extend his consciousness beyond the stone. The first time he managed to touch her dreams, it had been clumsy, a burst of images and emotions that sent her jolting awake in her small cottage. He had felt her confusion and fear, and he had pulled back, realizing he needed to be more careful. Over the following weeks, he learned to be subtle, weaving himself into her dreams as landscape at first. A forest darker than any forest should be, a presence watching from between the trees. Alara began to dream of wolves every night, dreams so vivid they felt more real than waking. She walked through ancient forests under skies filled with 2 moons, heard howls that resonated in her bones, and always, she felt eyes watching her from the shadows, silver eyes that held an intelligence far beyond animal cunning. If you're drawn into this story of ancient magic and forbidden connection, let me know in the comments what you think Alara should do when she discovers the truth. Should she trust the wolf or run? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more supernatural romance stories that will keep you up at night. Tonight, as Alara knelt before the statue performing her ritual, Kieran gathered his strength for something he had never attempted before. He was going to speak to her, not in dreams, but here, now, while she was awake. The risk was enormous. If he pushed too hard, he could shatter the fragile connection they had built. Or worse, the canned remnants of the curse could activate and destroy what little consciousness he had regained. But he was desperate. In her dreams, he had seen flashes of her waking life, had witnessed through her eyes the darkness gathering in the mountains. The seal that had been placed on the shadow gate was weakening, and when it broke, the horrors imprisoned there would pour into the world. Alara's village would be the first to fall, and she would die, never knowing that she had been the only light in a millennium of darkness. As she finished her prayer and sat back on her heels, Alara felt something shift in the air. The candle flame bent sideways, though there was no wind, and the temperature in the sanctuary dropped so suddenly that her breath misted. Her heart began to pound, instinct screaming at her to run, but she remained frozen, unable to look away from the statue. The silver inlays of its eyes were glowing brighter than she had ever seen, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. Then she heard it, a voice that seemed to resonate from the stone itself, from the air, from inside her own chest. "Thank you," the voice said, deep and rough as though unused for ages, layered with harmonics that no human throat could produce. "Thank you for remembering me." Alara's scream caught in her throat, emerging as barely a whimper. She scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the stone floor, her mind refusing to process what was happening. The statue hadn't moved, its form still perfect and unchanging, but the voice continued, and now she could feel a presence pressing against her consciousness, vast and ancient and achingly lonely. "Do not fear me, little flame," the voice said, and there was a gentleness to it that seemed at odds with its power. "I am Kieran, last of the primordial wolves, and I have been trapped in this stone prison for 1,000 years. Your candles, your prayers, they have given me the strength to reach across the barrier. I mean you no harm." Her rational mind told her she was experiencing a mental breakdown, that grief and isolation had finally broken something in her. But her soul, some deep part of her that existed beyond logic, recognized truth in those words. "The dreams," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The forests, the wolves, that was you." "Yes," Kieran replied, and she felt a wave of emotion from him, relief and sadness intertwined. "I have walked in your dreams, shown you fragments of what once was, but we have little time for gentle revelations. There is a darkness waking in these mountains, Alara, an evil that was sealed away in the same era I was imprisoned. The shadow gate is failing, and when it breaks, the creatures imprisoned beyond it will flood into this world. Your village, everyone you know, will be consumed unless the gate is reinforced." Alara forced herself to breathe, to think. If this was madness, it was a remarkably consistent madness. Why me? She asked, pushing herself back to her feet on trembling legs. Why? Tell me this. What can I possibly do against ancient evil? I'm no one, just an orphan who lights candles because my grandmother told me to. Kieran's presence seemed to focus on her more intently, and she felt him examining her, not just her physical form, but something deeper. You are far more than you know, he said quietly. Do you know why your grandmother taught you the ritual? Why her grandmother taught her? Your bloodline is ancient, Alara. You are descended from the very people who imprisoned me, from the council of elders who wielded the old magic. The ritual of the candles was not tradition. It was a fail-safe, a way to slowly wake me if the need ever arose. Because your ancestors knew that one day, the Shadowgate would fail, and only a primordial wolf could reinforce it. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her grandmother had known. All those years of teaching her the words, insisting she never miss a night, never let the flame go out. It had all been preparation for this moment. But her grandmother had died before explaining, taking her secrets to the grave, and Alara had continued out of love and habit, never imagining there was real purpose behind it. If what you say is true, she said slowly, then my ancestors imprisoned you, betrayed you according to your words. Why would they create a way to wake you? Why would you help the descendants of those who cursed you? It was a fair question, and Kieran respected her for asking it. Because, despite everything, I was created to protect, he answered, and she heard the weight of ages in his voice. The primordial wolves were born from the world's need for guardians, beings powerful enough to stand against the things that lurk at the edges of reality. My nature is bound to that purpose. I cannot ignore a threat to the balance, even if those I save are the children of my betrayers. And because, he added, his voice becoming softer, more intimate, you have been a light in my darkness. Alara, for 3 years, your voice has been the only kindness I have known. I would see you safe. Alara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process emotions and information that seemed too large for her mind to hold. How? She asked finally. How do I free you? What do I have to do? The answer is in your blood, Kieran said. The curse that binds me was fueled by the sacrifice of my own pack, blood magic of the darkest kind. To break it requires blood magic in return, willingly given by one, of the bloodline that created it. You must cut your palm and press it to the stone over my heart while speaking the words of unbinding. But Alara, he continued urgently, you must understand what you risk. I am not human. I am ancient and powerful, and I have been trapped in darkness for 1,000 years. I do not know what I will be when I am freed. I could be the guardian I once was, or I could be a monster forged from centuries of rage. If you free me, you are gambling everything on the hope that the creature I have become will honor the being I once was. She should have been terrified. Every survival instinct should have been screaming at her to run, to never return to this place. But as she stood there in the candlelight, feeling the presence of this ancient being wrapped around her consciousness, she realized she had already made her choice. Perhaps she had made it the first night she lit a candle and felt less alone than she had since her grandmother's death. Perhaps it had been made for her generations ago when her ancestor had crafted this ritual. What happens if I don't? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The shadow gate will break, Kieran said quietly. The creatures beyond it will pour through. Your village will be slaughtered in a single night, and the darkness will spread until it consumes everything. Without a primordial wolf to reinforce the seal, there is no force in this world strong enough to stop them. You and everyone you have ever known will die in agony. Alara walked to the statue, her hand reaching out to touch the cold stone for the first time. She had cleaned around it, swept the floor before it, laid flowers at its base, but she had never actually touched it. Her fingers met the carved fur of the wolf's chest, and the stone was cold, so cold it should have burned. But beneath the chill, she felt something else, a heartbeat, slow and steady and absolutely real. My grandmother trusted you, she said softly. She created this ritual to wake you, which means she believed you were worth saving, worth the risk. I don't know if that makes me brave or foolish, but I choose to trust her judgment. And, she added, her voice barely a whisper, I choose to trust you. The gratitude that flooded from Kieran was overwhelming, an emotional wave so intense that Alara's eyes filled with tears. In the satchel at her waist, she carried a small knife, used for cutting herbs and small tasks. She drew it now, the blade catching the candlelight. This is going to hurt, isn't it? She said. Not really a question. Yes, Kieran replied honestly. Blood magic always demands pain. But I will be with you. And I will remember this, Alara. I will remember that you chose courage when you could have chosen safety. She pressed the blade to her palm and drew it across in one quick motion, hissing at the sharp sting. Blood welled immediately, dripping down her wrist, and she pressed her bleeding hand against the stone over the statue's heart. The words of unbinding came to her lips as though her grandmother was speaking through her. Syllables of the old tongue that burned as she spoke them, each one resonating with power that made the air shimmer and the ground tremble. By blood freely given, by choice freely made, I release you from stone and silence. By the power that bound you, I unbind you. By the chains that held you, I free you. Wake, guardian. Wake, Kieran. Wake and walk the world again. The sanctuary exploded with light, brilliant and blinding. And Alara felt power surge through her hand into the stone, felt the curse shattering like glass, felt something massive and ancient and wild roaring to life after 1,000 years of imprisonment. The statue cracked, fissures spreading across its surface like lightning, light bleeding from the breaks. Alara stumbled backward as the cracks widened, as chunks of stone began to fall away, revealing not more stone beneath but fur, muscle, living flesh. The transformation was beautiful and terrible. Reality, rewriting itself as magic older than civilization, rewove the fabric of the world. The stone shell fell away in great pieces, crashing to the floor, and where a statue had stood, a living creature now emerged. Kieran stood before her in his true form, and he was magnificent. Even on 4 legs, his shoulder came to her chest, his body a mass of muscle covered in fur so black it seemed to absorb light, marked with silver patterns that swirled across his coat like liquid metal. His eyes, those silver eyes she had seen in dreams, blazed with intelligence and power and something that looked like wonder as they focused on her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Kieran stood trembling, relearning what it felt like to breathe, to feel air on his fur, to be able to move after an eternity of paralysis. Alara stood frozen, confronted with the reality of what she had unleashed. Then Kieran took a step forward, his movements uncertain, like a newborn learning to walk, and she saw tears, actual tears, streaming from those silver eyes. "You are real," he said, his voice now coming from the living creature before her, still layered with those impossible harmonics, but warmer, more present. "All these years, I feared you were a dream my dying mind had created. But you are real, and you are here, and I am free." Before Alara could respond, before she could process the enormity of what had just happened, Kieran's head snapped toward the sanctuary entrance, his ears flattening against his skull. "He is coming," Kieran growled, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through the floor. "The first of them has already crossed through. We need to move now." "Who?" Alara demanded, fear flooding back. "Who is coming?" "One of the Shadowborn," Kieran said, already moving toward her. They must have felt the curse breaking, and realized a primordial wolf was free again. "They will try to kill you before I can protect you. Get on my back." What followed was a blur of motion and terror. Alara barely managed to grab her satchel before Kieran was crouching beside her, and she scrambled onto his back, her fingers tangling in his thick fur. The moment she was secure, he launched into motion with a speed that stole her breath, bursting through the sanctuary doors and into the night. Behind them, something roared, a sound so full of malice and hunger that it turned her blood to ice. She risked a glance backward and immediately wished she hadn't. Climbing the stone steps, Toward the sanctuary was a creature that should not exist, a thing of shadow and teeth and too many eyes, its form constantly shifting as though it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to wear. It moved with horrible speed, reality seeming to bend around it. Kieran ran, his powerful legs eating up the distance, his breath coming in controlled bursts despite his centuries of imprisonment. He was heading up the mountain, not down toward the village, and Alara clung to him, trusting that he knew what he was doing. The creature pursued, its roars echoing off the mountain slopes, and she could hear other sounds now. More roars, more movements in the darkness. The shadow gate had broken completely, and the nightmares were pouring through. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the wind of their passage. "To the gate," Kieran called back. "I need to see how bad the damage is, and I need to draw them away from your village. Hold on." They crested a ridge, and Alara saw it. High on the mountain, where no natural formation should exist, a massive archway stood carved into the living rock. It pulsed with a sickly purple light, and from its opening, shadows poured like toxic smoke, coalescing into shapes that defied description before loping off into the night. The shadow gate, and it was completely shattered. Whatever seal had once held it closed was gone, leaving nothing but a wound in reality through which horrors streamed. "How do we close it?" Alara asked desperately. Kieran skidded too. A stop on an outcropping of rock, his eyes fixed on the gate, and she felt his dismay. "A primordial wolf can reinforce a weakening seal," he said slowly. "But this is beyond reinforcement. The gate has been completely destroyed. To close it now would require the same kind of sacrifice that created it originally." Alara didn't need to ask what kind of sacrifice. She could see it in the way his muscles tensed, in the resignation that flowed through whatever connection they shared. "No," she said, firmly. "There has to be another way. You didn't survive 1,000 years of imprisonment just to die the moment you were freed. I will not let that happen." Her fierce protectiveness surprised them both. "I am a primordial wolf," Kieran said gently, turning his great head to look at her. "We were created, knowing we might need to give our lives to protect the balance. It is an honor I have long been prepared for. You gave me a gift, Alara, freedom and these few moments to feel the wind and see the stars, and know that I was remembered. If my death means you and your people survive, then it is a death well spent." Before Alara could argue further, the Shadowborn that had been chasing them crested the ridge, and 3 more emerged from different directions, surrounding them. They were nightmare creatures, no two exactly alike, but all bearing the same aura of wrongness, of things that existed in defiance of natural law. Kieran's body coiled, preparing to fight, and Alara felt power gathering around him like a storm. "Get down," he commanded. "Put your back against the rock and do not move no matter what you see. This is going to be violent." She slid off his back, pressing herself against the stone outcropping as he had instructed, and watched as Kieran faced the creatures that had been birthed from the same darkness that had tried to consume the world a millennium ago. The battle that followed was savage and primal, a clash of powers that had no place in the modern world. Kieran moved, like living lightning, his jaws crushing shadow flesh, his claws tearing through forms that tried to become incorporeal to avoid his strikes. But these creatures were ancient too, and they adapted, learning his patterns, coordinating their attacks. Alara watched in horror as he fought, as his fur became matted with blood both black and red, as his movements began to slow from accumulated wounds. He was magnificent and deadly, but he was one against many, weakened from his long imprisonment, and more Shadowborn were emerging from the gate with every passing moment. She had to do something. She couldn't just crouch here watching him die after she had just freed him. Her hand, still bleeding from the cut she had made to break his curse, throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she remembered what Kieran had said. Blood magic, willingly given. The curse had been broken with her blood because she carried the bloodline that had created it. What else might her blood be capable of? Her grandmother had been powerful. She knew that now. Powerful enough to craft a failsafe that would work across generations. That power ran in Alara's veins whether she knew how to use it or not. Acting on instinct and desperation, Alara pulled her knife again and reopened the cut on her palm, letting her blood flow freely. She pressed her bleeding hand to the stone beneath her and spoke, not the words of unbinding this time, but words that came from somewhere deeper. From genetic memory, perhaps. From the collective unconscious of her bloodline. By blood and stone, by earth and bone, I call upon the ancient power. Protect what must be protected. Seal what must be sealed. Give strength to the guardian. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The stone beneath her hand began to glow with golden light, and that light spread, racing across the ground in branching patterns that looked like roots or veins. Where the light touched, the earth responded, stone rising in pillars, forming barriers, creating a perimeter around the gate that the Shadowborn could not cross. Kieran, bloodied but still fighting, felt the surge of power and understood immediately what she was attempting. She was trying to create a temporary seal, using her blood and will to reinforce reality itself around the gate. It wouldn't hold forever, probably wouldn't even hold through the night, but it would give them time. He redoubled his efforts, driving the Shadowborn back toward the gate, back into the barrier of light that was growing stronger with every drop of blood Alara shed. The creatures shrieked and recoiled from the light, their shadow forms burning where it touched them, and Kieran pressed his advantage, his jaws closing on the largest of them, and tearing it apart in a spray of darkness that dissolved like smoke. But Alara was weakening, the blood loss and magical expenditure draining her rapidly. She could feel her consciousness starting to fade, black spots appearing in her vision. Just a little more, she told herself. Just enough to seal them in. Kieran sensed her failing and abandoned the fight, racing to her side just as her legs gave out. He caught her against his chest, his large body curling protectively around her, and she felt his panic through their connection. "Stop!" he commanded. "Alara, stop! You are killing yourself." But she couldn't stop. Not yet. With the last of her strength, she spoke one final word of power, and the barrier snapped into place like a portcullis, slamming down, sealing the gate and everything near it inside a prison of light and stone. Then darkness took her, and she knew nothing more. When Alara woke, she was warm and comfortable, lying on something soft, and for a confused moment, she thought she was in her own bed in her cottage. Then memory came flooding back, the statue, Kieran, the battle, and her eyes snapped open. She was in a cave, she realized, a large natural chamber lit by a fire burning in a stone ring. Furs and blankets had been arranged into a makeshift bed, and she was wrapped in them, her wounded hand carefully bandaged with strips of clean cloth. Across the fire, Kieran lay in his wolf form, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and even. He was covered in wounds, some still seeping blood, and Alara's heart clenched at the sight. As if sensing her waking, his eyes opened, those silver eyes focusing on her immediately. "You are awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "You have been unconscious for 2 days. I was beginning to fear you would not return to me." Alara tried to sit up, her body protesting every movement. 2 days, she croaked, her throat dry. "My village, are they?" "Safe," Kieran assured her quickly. "The barrier you created has held. No Shadowborn have escaped, and I have spent the last 2 days hunting down any that were outside the perimeter when it formed. Your people do not even know how close they came to annihilation. You saved them, Alara. What you did, that magic, it should have been impossible for someone untrained, but you did it anyway." She managed to push herself into a sitting position, accepting the water skin he nudged toward her with his nose. After drinking deeply, she looked at him. Really looked at him, taking in the extent of his injuries. "You are hurt," she said softly. "Badly hurt." "I will heal," he replied. "A primordial. Wolf's regeneration is formidable. I have survived far worse. But Alara, we need to talk about what comes next. The barrier you created is powerful, but it is not permanent. It is already beginning to weaken. We have perhaps a week, maybe 2 at most, before it fails completely. And when it does, the Shadowborn will pour out again. And this time, there will be more of them, because the gate is completely open, and they have been breeding in their prison for 1,000 years. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. So we are back to the original problem, she said quietly. The gate needs to be sealed, permanently, and that requires a sacrifice you are prepared to make, and I am not prepared to allow. Kieran rose to his feet with a slight wince, moving closer to her, until they were separated by only a few feet. Look at me, Alara, he said gently. I am not human. I do not have a human lifespan, human dreams, human needs. I was created to serve a purpose, and that purpose is to protect the balance. If my death can seal that gate and save countless lives, then it is not a tragedy. It is a fulfillment of everything I was meant to be. You should not mourn for me. Alara felt tears burning in her eyes, frustration and grief warring in her chest. You may not be human, she said fiercely, but you can feel. I know you can because I have felt your loneliness, your pain, your gratitude. You spent 1,000 years in darkness, Kieran, and I will not let you trade that prison for oblivion without exhausting every other option. There has to be another way. If my bloodline created the original seal, if my blood has power, then maybe there is something else I can do, some other magic we have not considered. I am willing to try anything, pay any price, if it means you get to live. The emotion that radiated from Kieran was complex and overwhelming. Why? He asked simply. Why does my survival matter so much to you? You barely know me. I could still become the monster I warned you about. I could be a danger to you and everyone else. Why are you so determined to save me? Because you matter, Alara said, her voice breaking. Because in 3 years of lighting candles and speaking to what I thought was a statue, I felt less alone than I had ever felt in my life. Because when I finally heard your voice, when I felt your presence, something in me recognized you, Kieran. I don't understand it, and maybe it is just the connection created by the ritual, but I cannot bear the thought of you dying. Not when you have barely begun to live again. Something shifted in Kieran's expression. A wall, crumbling, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw with emotions he had suppressed for centuries. There is a bond, he admitted. I felt it form the moment you freed me, maybe even before that, growing stronger with every candle you lit. In my kind, we call it a soul bond, a connection between beings that transcends normal relationship, that ties two souls together across lifetimes. It is rare, precious, and I never thought I would experience it because I believed I was the last of my kind, and such bonds do not typically form across species barriers. But you, Alara, you are bound to me and I to you, and it explains why your magic was so powerful, why you could create a seal that should have been beyond your training. We are stronger together than apart. A soul bond, Alara whispered, testing the words. The concept should have terrified her, this idea that her soul was tied to an ancient wolf spirit. But instead, it felt right, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Is that why I can feel your emotions? Why I dream of forests and running on 4 legs through moonlight? Yes, Kieran said. And why I can sense when you are in danger. Why your pain becomes my pain. It is a gift and a burden, Alara. If you wish, I can show you how to sever it. You did not choose this, and you should not be bound to me against your will. Don't you dare, she said immediately, surprising herself with her vehemence. Don't even think about severing it. I don't care if I didn't choose it consciously. Some part of me chose you every time I climbed those steps and lit a candle. Some part of me has been choosing you for 3 years. If we are bound, then we are bound. And we face this together. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to rest until you are healed, and I have recovered my strength. Then, we are going to search through every scrap of knowledge my grandmother left. Every book and scroll and carved stone in that sanctuary, until we find another way to seal that gate. And if we cannot find another way, she added, her voice becoming steel, then we will create one. Because I refuse to believe that the only option is your death. For the first time since his imprisonment, Kieran felt something he had not felt in ages. Hope, real and fragile and terrifying in its intensity. "Very well," he said softly. "We will try. But Alara, if we run out of time, if the barrier falls and there is no other option, you must promise me that you will let me do what needs to be done. Promise. Me, you will not throw your life away trying to stop me." She wanted to refuse, to tell him she would never make such a promise, but she saw the plea in his eyes and understood that he needed this. Needed to know that his sacrifice, if it came to that, would mean something. "I promise," she said finally, the words tasting like ash. "But only if you promise that you will fight with everything you have to find another way, that you will not give up on living just because dying seems easier." "Deal," Kieran agreed, and some of the tension eased from the air between them. "Now rest. You pushed yourself to the brink of death, and healing takes time. I will keep watch and make sure nothing disturbs you." As Alara settled back into the furs, exhaustion pulling at her, she reached out and placed her hand on Kieran's foreleg, needing the physical contact, the reassurance that he was real and present. He curled around her instinctively, his large body forming a protective barrier between her and the world, and she fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his fur against her skin. Over the following days, they fell into a routine born of necessity and deepening connection. Kieran hunted, bringing back game that Alara cooked over the fire, and they ate together while discussing strategy and sharing stories. He told her of the world as it had been, of the age when primordial wolves ran freely and magic was commonplace, of the slow decline as humans grew in number and the old powers faded. She told him of her life, her childhood with her grandmother, the loneliness after she died, the mockery of the villagers who thought her mad. They explored the sanctuary together, searching through chambers that had been sealed for generations, finding scrolls written in the old tongue that Kieran translated, while Alara carefully transcribed them into a language she could read. In a hidden library beneath the sanctuary, they found her grandmother's journals, decades of research into the old magic, into the history of the Shadowborn, and the sacrifices that had been made to imprison them. Alara read late into the night by firelight while Kieran rested nearby, and slowly, a picture emerged of her family's true role in history. Her ancestors had not been simple villagers, but members of an order of mages dedicated to maintaining the barriers between worlds. The order had fallen, destroyed by infighting and the betrayal that had seen Kieran imprisoned, but her grandmother had kept the knowledge alive, had known that one day it would be needed again, and had prepared Alara as best she could in the time she had. There were references to alternate sealing methods, theoretical approaches that might not require a primordial wolf's death, but they were incomplete, missing crucial steps or requiring materials that might no longer exist. Still, it was more than they had before, and Alara copied everything meticulously, building a grimoire of possibilities. Kieran watched her work with a mixture of admiration and growing affection. She was brilliant and determined, her mind sharp and adaptive, and despite having no formal training, she was beginning to grasp magical principles that took most mages years to understand. The soul bond certainly helped, allowing her to draw on his instinctive understanding of magic, but it was her own intelligence and will that transformed that borrowed knowledge into practical application. As the days passed and the barrier continued to weaken, they also grew closer in ways that had nothing to do with magic or destiny. Kieran made her laugh with stories of his youth, of the pranks young primordial wolves played on their elders, and the trouble he had gotten into before assuming his duties as guardian. Alara shared her dreams with him, the simple hopes she had nurtured even in her loneliness, wanting to travel beyond the mountains, to see the ocean, to write down the stories her grandmother had told her so. They would not be lost. They talked about philosophy and ethics, debated the nature of sacrifice and duty, and discovered that despite being from different species and eras, they shared fundamental values about what made a life worth living. The soul bond deepened with every conversation, every shared moment, until Alara could sense Kieran's presence even when they were in different parts of the sanctuary, and he could feel her emotions as clearly as his own. It was intimate, and sometimes overwhelming, this lack of barriers between them, but neither wanted to pull back. They were learning each other on a level most beings never experienced. And with that knowledge came a connection that transcended simple romance or partnership. They were becoming two halves of a whole, complementary and necessary to each other in ways that had nothing to do with the crisis they faced, and everything to do with who they were at their cores. On the 8th night, as they sat together watching the fire burn low, Alara made a discovery. She had been rereading a section of her grandmother's journal that discussed blood magic and sympathetic resonance, and something clicked in her mind. Connections forming between disparate pieces of information. "Kieran," she said slowly, her heart beginning to race. "What if the sacrifice does not have to be death? What if it just needs to be permanent commitment, a binding of power to purpose?" He lifted his head from his paws, his attention immediately focused on her. "Explain," he said. Alara stood, beginning to pace as her thoughts tumbled out. The original seal required the sacrifice of primordial wolves, their life force used to power the barrier. But what if we approach it differently? I have your blood from when you were wounded. I have my own blood. We are soul bonded, our powers connected and amplified by that connection. What if instead of you dying to power the seal, we both commit our power to it, permanently? We bind ourselves to the gate as its guardians, tethering our life force to its maintenance. You would be weakened, unable to leave the mountain for long periods, and I would be bound here too, but we would both live. It is theoretically possible, Kieran said carefully, his mind racing through the magical implications. Sympathetic magic using bonded souls as an anchor, sustained commitment instead of instant sacrifice. But Alara, such a binding would be for your entire lifetime. You would be tied to this mountain, to the gate, unable to pursue any of those dreams you shared with me. You would grow old while I remained unchanged. And when you eventually died, the seal would likely fail, unless we could find someone else with your bloodline to take your place. You would be trading your freedom for mine. I would be trading a lonely freedom for a purposeful partnership, Alara corrected. My dreams of traveling, of seeing the world, those were the dreams of a girl who thought she had no one and nothing. But I have you now, Kieran. We have each other. And if we can protect people, if we can maintain the barrier and prevent another catastrophe, then that is purpose enough. Besides, she added with a small smile, who says we cannot have small adventures here? The mountains are vast, and I have never explored them properly. And perhaps, in time, we can strengthen the seal enough that short trips away become possible. Are you certain? Kieran asked, rising to his feet and moving to stand before her. This is not a decision to make lightly, Alara. Once done, it cannot be undone. I am certain, she said without hesitation. I am choosing this, choosing you, choosing a life of meaning over a life of emptiness. Show me what we need to do. The ritual they designed took 3 days to prepare, combining elements from her grandmother's research with Kieran's knowledge of primordial magic and the innovations Alara's own unique perspective brought to the work. They gathered components, carved symbols into the stone, around the gate, and prepared themselves mentally and spiritually for a binding that would reshape both their existences. On the night of the full moon, they stood before the shadow gate, the barrier Alara had created flickering and weak, barely holding back the press of Shadowborn on the other side. Alara had reopened the cut on her palm, and Kieran had allowed her to take blood from a wound on his foreleg. She had mixed their blood in a stone bowl carved with runes of binding and eternity, and now they began the incantation together, their voices rising in harmony, speaking words in the old tongue that resonated with power that made the very air shimmer. By blood and bone, by soul and stone, we offer ourselves as eternal guardians, our power to fuel the seal, our will to maintain the barrier, our lives to stand watch through all the ages. Let those who would break through find us waiting. Let the darkness know that it shall not pass. We are the threshold. We are the key. We are the eternal vigil. As they spoke, Alara poured the blood onto the ground before the gate, and it began to glow with brilliant light, threads of power spiraling up to wrap around the archway. She felt her magic pouring out, flowing through the connection to Kieran and back, amplified and transformed, and she felt his power joining hers, ancient and vast, channeling through her humanity to gain form and direction. The sensation was indescribable, ecstasy and agony intertwined, as fundamental aspects of their beings were rewritten, bound to the gate and to each other in ways that went beyond the soul bond they already shared. Alara felt roots growing from her essence, diving deep into the mountain, connecting her to the living stone and the flows of power that ran through the earth. Kieran felt chains forging themselves, not the cruel chains of his imprisonment, but willing bonds of duty and purpose, tethering him to this place as its eternal sentinel. The magic built to a crescendo, light, blazing so bright it could be seen from the valley below, and then, with a sound like reality itself, sighing in relief, the seal snapped into place. The shadow gate closed, not just blocked but fundamentally shut, its connection to the realm beyond, severed and sealed with a power that would endure as long as Alara and Kieran lived. The Shadowborn trapped on the other side, howled in rage and frustration, but their cries grew distant and then silent as the gate became inert, just an arch of carved stone with no power left in it. The barrier Alara had created earlier dissolved, no longer needed, and in its wake was silence and peace. It was done, Alara whispered, swaying with exhaustion. We did it. Kieran caught her before she fell, transforming in a shimmer of magic to his human form for the first time. A tall, powerfully built man with silver hair and those same luminous eyes, catching her in strong arms. I've got you, he murmured, holding her close. Rest now. You were magnificent. She wanted to ask about his human form, wanted to marvel at this new aspect of him, but sleep was dragging her down, and she surrendered to it, safe in his embrace. When she woke, it was to daylight, streaming through the sanctuary windows, and the feeling of being carried. Kieran, still in his human form, was carrying her down the mountain path toward her cottage, and she stirred in his arms, blinking up at him. You should have woken me, she protested weakly. I can walk. You can barely keep your eyes open, he replied with amusement. Allow me this, Alara. I have carried you before in my wolf form, but this is different. Let me care for you as you have cared for me. She relaxed against his chest, studying his human face, committing every detail to memory. You are beautiful, she said without thinking, then blushed. In both forms, I mean. Kieran smiled, an expression of such warmth that it transformed his face from merely handsome to breathtaking. As are you, little flame, he said softly. Though, I confess, I prefer the term magnificent to beautiful. Beautiful seems too small a word for what you are. They reached her cottage, and he carried her inside, laying her gently on her bed. The villagers had not disturbed it during her absence, either out of respect for the dead, since they probably assumed she was dead after disappearing for nearly 2 weeks, or out of superstition. Over the following weeks, Alara and Kieran established their new life as guardians of the sealed gate. They made the sanctuary their primary home, cleaning and repairing it, turning it into a place that was both fortress and haven. Kieran alternated between his wolf and human forms, teaching Alara magic and combat, preparing her for a life that might span decades or even centuries if the magic of the binding extended her natural lifespan, as he suspected it might. They explored the mountains together, marking the boundaries of the territory they were bound to protect, and discovered that while they could not leave the region for long, the area was far larger than they had initially thought, encompassing valleys and peaks and hidden places of great beauty. The villagers who had thought Alara dead were shocked when she returned with a stranger she introduced as Kieran, a scholar who would be helping her maintain the old sanctuary. Rumors swirled, of course, but Alara had stopped caring what the villagers thought. She had found her purpose and her partner, and their opinions seemed trivial in comparison. Some of the braver villagers began to come to the sanctuary seeking the blessings of the old guardian, and Alara accommodated them, creating new rituals that honored Kieran without revealing his true nature. It became a place of pilgrimage again, though on a small scale, and the offerings left by grateful villagers helped sustain them. Months passed, then a year, and the bond between Alara and Kieran continued to deepen in ways both magical and mundane. They were partners in guardianship, allies in magic, but also something more. Something that had been growing since the moment she freed him. The transition from partnership to romance was so gradual and natural that neither could point to a specific moment when it happened. It was there in the way he taught her to fight, patient and encouraging. His hands gentle when correcting her stance. It was there in the way she read to him from books by firelight, her voice soothing after a day of patrolling. It was there in stolen glances and accidental touches that lingered too long, in conversations that stretched late into the night about everything and nothing. The first time he kissed her, it was during a summer storm that had trapped them in the sanctuary. They had been arguing playfully about some obscure point of magical theory, and she had been gesturing emphatically when he caught her hand, pulling her close with a look in his eyes that made her breath catch. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with want and restraint. "Please," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, and the world narrowed to just that point of contact. Sweet and fierce and perfect. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since you first lit a candle in the darkness, since you chose courage over fear, since you fought for my life when you barely knew me. I love you, Alara, and I will love you until the stars burn out." "I love you too," she replied, tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time. "You are my purpose and my joy, my partner and my home. Whatever time we have, however long or short, I choose to spend it with you." Their relationship grew from that confession, physical intimacy, adding another dimension to the profound emotional and magical connection they already shared. They made love under moonlight in the sanctuary, in their private quarters carved into the mountain, in meadows hidden from prying eyes, and each time was a celebration of life reclaimed and love chosen. The soul bond amplified everything between them, pleasure and emotion feedback looping until they could hardly tell where one ended and the other began. And in those moments of complete union, they were truly one being in two bodies. Years passed in a rhythm of duty and devotion, and Alara did not age as she should have. The magic of the binding sustained her, extending her life to match Kieran's timeless existence, and she found she did not mind being bound to the mountain when it meant she could spend eternity with him. They became legends in the valley, the sanctuary keeper and her mysterious companion, and people came from far and wide to seek their counsel and blessing. Alara became a teacher, training those with magical potential in the basics of the old arts, ensuring that the knowledge her grandmother had preserved would not be lost again. Kieran remained the silent guardian, his wolf form a comforting presence, patrolling the heights, a protector watching over those who did not even know they needed protecting. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Alara would light a candle before the place where the statue had stood, a tribute to the ritual that had brought them together. Kieran would join her, and they would sit together in comfortable silence, remembering the night she chose to free a stranger based on nothing more than faith and compassion. "That candle you lit," he would say sometimes, his arm around her shoulders. "It saved my life in more ways than breaking a curse. It reminded me what kindness looked like, what hope felt like, what it meant to be more than a weapon or a guardian. It made me want to live again, and your candles these past years have given me a life worth living," she would reply, leaning into his warmth. "Thank you for trusting me to free you, for fighting by my side, for choosing to build a life with me rather than just existing." Their love story became woven into the history of the mountains, whispered by mothers to daughters, told to young lovers as an example of devotion that transcended difference and difficulty. The sanctuary stood strong, the gate remained sealed, and the guardian and his flame watched over it all, eternal and together. Some nights, when the moon was full and the wind carried old songs, They would run together through the forests, Ilara transformed by magic into a wolf, the same silver as Kieran's markings, and they would howl their joy to the stars. Free and wild and infinitely grateful for the night, a lonely girl chose to light a candle for an ancient wolf, and in doing so, lit both their paths to a future neither could have imagined, but both were glad to share. The end. If you enjoyed this tale of ancient magic and eternal love, please let me know in the comments which moment touched you most. Was it when Ilara freed Kieran? When they sealed the gate together? Or when they finally confessed their love? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more supernatural romance stories that explore the power of choice, sacrifice, and love that transcends all boundaries. What story would you like to hear next?